Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is The Take on this Wednesday. It's hump day, yes, and it's a little bit of the grind. We all know that. I'll tell you what, The Take with Market Rebellion is always fun because we try to track yesterday a little bit. And why do we do that? Because we want to give you a little bit of a setup to what happened yesterday, what might be leading into what's happening today. Yesterday, we kicked off earnings season, and yes, the financials delivered. It was JP Morgan, it was Goldman Sachs, and the deliveries that they got were impressive, and a lot of those numbers were great. These stocks had run to the upside, and we suddenly had this big pullback, and everybody was concerned. This is not unnormal. This is something that is very normal for what happens oftentimes when we see stocks that have absolutely crushed it. And you go back and you can look, those financials that started in November, along with energy and materials, had absolutely exploded to this point, and it almost seems like whatever numbers are out there, it would be very, very difficult to kind of move the needle to the upside without some sort of pause, some sort of a pullback. So I think that's a little bit of part of why we were seeing what we were seeing yesterday. We also were seeing that the Dow yesterday, it was off a little bit in the pre-market. It kind of briefly pulled into the green early in the day, and then it just started to slide. Midday, we saw a little bit of a slide. Closed down about 100 points. No big deal. 100 points on the mechanism that we're talking about is very, very small movement. Then you look over at the NASDAQ. We also pushed to the downside yesterday. It was that second half of the day where we saw a lot of that selling. It hit new highs, but then we started to see some of that selling, some of the pressure that was coming onto the market. So you look over at the volatility index, and yes, we did get underneath 16 yesterday because of the fact markets were a little bit of a tighter range, and early on, we did see a little bit of green, like I said, before we started to move back into the red position. So we finished the day actually very near the highs on volatility, up and above that 17 number. So volumes, strong once again. Almost 36 million contracts yesterday, 35.8 million contracts yesterday. Yes, it was Apple, it was Tesla. They were the million contract club. Actually, Apple was 2.3 million. But then you look at Tesla, a little over a million, AMC about 700,000. Yep, they continue in those rebel stocks. Nokia, another rebel stock, about 500,000. So certainly we can see where a lot of the activity is moving, at least that top tier. But then after that, it's well distributed across so many different names, which I think is very healthy. It's why we have the markets that we have. It's probably why we are having the markets that rotate. And with that rotation, we're hitting new highs in different indices, it seems like, on a daily basis. Crude right around 75. Bitcoin very close to that 32,700. Yeah, we slipped underneath 33,000. Not that big of a deal. The 10-year yesterday was up significantly. So that was something that we were definitely watching because of the fact that all the angst that happened when we were up and above that 1.6 area. Then we got down to 1.25. Everybody's been worried in both directions. And it seems to me like there's a lot to do about nothing because we've got these ranges, and until we really break one direction or the other, which we haven't yet, but until we really break, I think that's when I think some of the concerns that folks might have will start to elevate that much more. I think people are starting to see exactly what's been going on. Those Chinese names yesterday, we talked about that. The Chinese names, strength. I talked about this on the halftime report yesterday, but we had activity across the board in so many different names. But those Chinese names, you had JD, you had Baidu, you had Baba, you had all kinds of unusual option activity yesterday. That Baba activity seemed to have been a pretty nice spike earlier today. In the pre-market, I was seeing that Baba had a really nice move to the upside. Old school strength. Take a look at what was going on with Apple, Salesforce, and then, of course, Microsoft, some very, very strong numbers. Target hit another all-time high yesterday. So that kind of defines where we were yesterday. Some ups and some downs in certain areas of the market that are very consistent, others where it's just moving day in and day out. So today, Bank of America, they were missed on their revenue and they paid for it. Stock was down. Last I looked, it was down about 3%. On the other hand, Citi, a great report, both sides beating the beat, and that stock was up about 3%. So you can kind of get a little bit of a sense of what's going on with the financials. I wouldn't be surprised if it sold off a little bit more, Citi included, just because of the fact that so many of these names have made incredible runs to the upside. So you almost look for that pause. And sometimes that is where there is opportunity that's created. And we'll see if that opportunity with this significant sell-off, that might be great opportunities. We'll see. We have not seen option flows in there to tell us right now that the financials are the place to be running back into right now. Where we do see it is in a lot of other areas in the marketplace, specifically tech. But I'll get into that in just a second. So this morning, we're looking at the markets. NASDAQ up about 100 points, pretty significant. You look over at the Dow, up about 80. Dow then, as we got closer and closer to the open, we're up about 170 points. We kind of eased back, up 100 and a quarter. Last I looked, we were up about 90 points. On the other hand, it's just been a solid driving run for the NASDAQ where we are hovering right around that up 90, up 110 sort of a range, and a really, really impressive start to the day. Crude, right around 75, a little bit less, so not a lot to say about that. You got gold and silver actually starting to move to the upside. So early on the sectors, what was interesting was very early on, we had energy absolutely leading all the sectors. That completely flipped, and energy suddenly, as we got underneath 75 on crude, we saw energy completely flip. On the other hand, you had technology, which was up, really start to spike to the upside. It was up about 0.5%, and all of a sudden, before you know it, it's up about 1%. One of the big driving forces of what we are seeing in the NASDAQ right now. On the other side of it, it's the semiconductors. They are absolutely been on fire, and there's specific names lately that seem to be taking over some of that leadership. Some of the names that we know those names, we don't hear them quite as often. Stephen Weiss was talking about Skyworks the other day on our round table. Skyworks is one of those names that looks very impressive today. It was up like 3.5% earlier. I looked over at the SMH. It was up about 1.25%. That was looking pretty strong, along with technology. That was what was driving, I think, we were seeing in this NASDAQ. Qualcomm, Micron, Applied Materials, KLAC, Tencor, you can go through the list, all of which were definite leadership names that were pushing the markets to the upside, definitely influencing the NASDAQ. In terms of some of the other big names, how about Apple? Once again, just continues. And we talked about this yesterday. One of the things that we had a discussion before the show yesterday, and that's why we hit it so strong, was we were seeing Apple, we were seeing Microsoft, we were seeing all kinds of different names, but a lot of the old school names. Juniper came up once again with unusual option activity. That was one of the ones that we focused on. But across the board, just an incredible amount of tech, call it semiconductors, that were absolutely hitting with huge volumes and looking for even more upside. So that sort of is the theme. By the way, quietly, it's interesting to see how Intel's just been kind of sort of floating right around near that 57 level. I don't know if it's going to be able to make it up and through 60. We haven't seen option activity in that name yet, but we have seen a lot of unusual and a lot of other names. So let's jump to today's unusual. We'll get out of here. Apple. I know, but Apple just hits and hits and hits and hits and hits, and it's a daily thing lately. As a matter of fact, in the last couple of weeks, the number of Apple options that have hit is absolutely extraordinary. Today's unusual is extraordinary because of where they're going. They're going out in time, August 27th. But not only that, so they're buying time. They're buying all of July, all of August. And that's interesting. But how about this? They bought 10,000 of the August 27th expiring, the 185 calls. Stock is 148 at the time. So that gives you a little bit of a perspective. Doesn't, by the way, just a quick educational thing. If it makes any kind of move in the shorter term, those options will probably start to move to the upside. It doesn't have to go up and through for those options to start to move to the upside. It's just all part of it. Right now, Theta is working actually on the side of that, but sooner or later, you'll start to see as that time premium starts to really start to hit a little bit closer, that pulls a lot of that juice out of those options. For right now, that's very inexpensive. They were 19 cents up to 26 cents on this 10,000 they're buying. We just continue to see these huge chunky orders coming into Apple that are getting filled at some very, very interesting levels. Next, Netflix. We haven't talked about this one as much of late. Everybody's been focusing on Disney. All of a sudden you take a look over at Netflix and you see a stock that's actually been performing just pretty nice, actually. Stock trading around 549. The buyer of 9,000 of the July 550s. Now, when I say July, that means this week. These expire this week. They're not going any further out in time. You've got today, tomorrow, Friday. That's it. Then these options are gone. But they're right at the money. They're the 550s. 9,600 of these calls. They started buying them at about just underneath $2. They paid all the way up to $3.80 for these calls. Stock was obviously starting to move to the upside. So this is another one of those names, and it's a name that I think is very interesting. Everybody's piling into Disney, And yet at the same time, I'm looking over at Netflix, which has all this international growth, and they've got a lot of other things, and they've changed a lot about what they're doing with their financials and everything else. I think this is a very interesting trade. Doesn't mean it's for everybody. I'm just saying, seeing 9,600 of these very short term, and can this break out to the upside? It already has made a move, and last I looked, above 550. So yes, it absolutely can. It's just a matter of how fast and can it get high enough to move these options that much more. Folks, have a great day of trading. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I will say this, get educated. You want to be educated on the derivatives markets. We talk about that volumes all the time. And if you can understand what I'm talking about when I talk about theta, when I talk about some of these Greeks, if you don't, you definitely want to read the books, get educated one way or the other, but find a way to understand, because this is the growth part of the markets. Have a great day of trading.